Right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the second half of the Mike Jackson talk. A lot of talk about Norton, Mike's Norton years and his racing years and all the other bike makes and enterprises he's been involved with over almost 60-year career. But first, we're going to ask Chairman of the Norton Owners Club, Paul White, to tell us a little bit about the club. And we also have Peter White, I beg your pardon. We have Paul Smith, Vice Chairman, also for the later sort of question and answers, and Mike being President of the club. So we've got the three key people from the club. Right, so over to Peter to tell us a little bit about the club.
Well, hi, and first of all, thank you for coming back after lunch. The opportunity, however, is after me, you do get to hear some more from Mike, so it will be worth your while. My job is really just to tell you a little bit about the Norton Owners Club. And the Norton Owners Club is probably one of the country's largest classic motorcycle clubs, insofar as it's got about 5,500 members. We're obviously nothing like as big as the VMCC or anything like that, but in terms of individual marks, we're not the largest, but probably second or third. The club's been going since 1959, as you heard from Mike earlier. I hadn't heard one of those stories, Mike. I think I'd heard the one about Taylor Mattison's basement.
How many more do you want?
Yeah. So that's how I think we started. But it has been growing very steadily over the years till it's reached its present size. And we've got, of that 5,500, about 1,000 are based in outside of the UK. And we actually worked it out that they're in 42 different countries, believe it or not. So we've got some representation over a wide area. Inside the UK, we've got 30 branches, including, and it's nice to see Surrey and Kent here today, and Essex as well, and even Warwickshire. Possibly some more.
And Oxfordshire.
And Oxfordshire, sorry, yes, thank you very much. Okay, so very much I think like most motorcycle clubs, we're a social organisation insofar as that we give an opportunity for bikers to get together, to go out on ride-outs, to get together for meetings, listen to speakers, and generally have a good time. It's hard work riding a motorcycle, so sometimes you do need a bit of technical support, and this is where the club can really help. The club has been noted as being one of the cheapest, believe it or not, in the UK. We charge just over 22 quid, I think, for a year's membership, and for that you also get 12 monthly copies of our Road Holder magazine, which is pretty good value in our book, but you also get technical support, access to the branches, access to our record system and our library and so forth. And all in all, that's one of the reasons why our membership has unusually perhaps continued fairly strongly. Just a word about the future, possibly. We all know that the elephant in the room is that none of us are getting any younger, and as I cast my eye across the hairlines, I noticed that many of them are uncomfortably near mine, apart from Julie. Sorry. Having said that, we're luckier than most in that Norton are still making bikes. Yes, please.
That was her revenge.
We're still making bikes, and even during the 13th ownership of the gentleman in Donington, they did make allegedly about 2,000, maybe 2,500 961 based commandos. And very simply, we'd very much like those people and those owners of those things to join the club. And we want to be their support mechanism. And the reason is very clearly because they're about 10 or 20 years younger on average than the commando owners who have been the ones who've taken the club forward in the past. But of course, if we look into the future, it's not just the internal combustion engine Nortons that we're looking at. We want to be involved with the new Nortons, which no doubt will probably be electric or something similar. And so I think what we're focused on, and Paul here and I have talked about it on a number of occasions, is to try and get a very simplified club system which people can take with them, and maybe also provide support for EV charging and map work and perhaps recovery to be part of the offer that the club is providing. But, you know, we shall see, as they say. In the meantime, I think the club is in good stead, and we hope to be around for a lot longer yet. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Peter. The club is prominently featured in the current Classic Bike magazine, November issue. Feature on the club's big rally in Essex, and a couple of, and is it 2 of the members' bikes featured? Yeah. So it's good reading. I'm delighted that this afternoon we're joined by Bob Cakebread. Bob was at the Plumstead factory, 62 to 69, and played a crucial role in the development of the Norton Commando. So, welcome, Bob. And we also have Neil Spalders, who was MotoGP technical commentator and has written a wonderful book on technical aspects of modern GP racing and so on. So, welcome, Spalders. Great to have you here. Now we've got there are 4 of us on the panel to take some questions. Mike's got a few other topics he'd like to talk about, but let's first, any questions from the floor, please, before we resume the talk. Mr. Curzon. So
we have Mike Jackson 5s, please.
I'm sorry, I didn't...
Mike Jackson 5. I'm a bit lost.
Yes, it's to do with the inflation.
No.
There were only 4 of them at one time.
You had Jackson 5s, best competition bike, best street bike, best events, worst events, and best people.
Well, if you wanted my personal best event, would be the Elsinore Grand Prix. My favourite, I rode 3 exciting prototypes, all very marketable in my time at NVT. The B50 isolastic street bike, which was thrown out of court by the Italian and French and other European importers because it didn't have an electric start. That would have been a brilliant bike. The 870, the Thunderbird 3, that was a brilliant bike and would have become a firm favourite, but it never reached the market. And then there was the isolastic Stormer AGS, a 500 single 2-stroke, which of course vibrated, as they did in them days. But we made a 500 single 2-stroke and mounted it isolastically, and Vic Eastwood tested it. But unfortunately, Vic was a wonderful rider, but he wasn't a developed rider. He was a Grand Prix racer. So we mixed instructions there, and that never happened. What was the third thing I've got to comment on?
5 most desirable Norton street bikes.
5 most desirable street bikes. Gosh, a tricky one. Can I get back to you next week on that? Obviously, the odd Norton. I've ridden some amazing bikes over the years, and one or two of them might even be pre-war. Yes, an unexpected question. At these sort of do's, the bloke who asks the questions must know the answers, otherwise he mustn't ask the question.
Your 5 Street would be the 850 Mark II-A Commando at Wolverhampton, the Export Dominator, the Export P11, and there was another 2.
Yes, all good stuff. And can you include a 500T in that, please?
That was in your competition.
Yeah, for going up the side of a house, you know.
It was desirable competition.
Yeah.
Right, thank you, Anthony. Alan, if we can go to Alan next, please.
Mike, when you were in the UK, you had to deal with Norton dealers on a regular basis, and one of those was Gus Kuhn, who of course also went racing quite successfully against the factory. Did that cause you problems, and what did you think of
Not
Gus
right.
Kuhn?
Well, Prune, as we called him, Gus Kuhn, run by Vincent Davey, a very personable proprietor and a thinker and a strategist. He went into all aspects of dealership, you know, spares, service, sales, and racing. And he was good at whatever he tackled. And when dealers go racing, they clearly always ambition to outpace the factory. You know, that our bikes were quicker than the factory bikes, and there was an element of that. And he was able to employ good engine men, good chassis men. But we never saw him as if we were ever beaten by a Kuhn Commando, I don't think there were any hard feelings, you know, other than we must do better next time. But he was fun to deal with, and as I was telling you during the interval, most of you know what VAT stands for, but in South London in those days, it stood for Vincent's Added Tax, because his prices were more expensive than, say, Elite Motors or Slow Burn and Hughes, Coven and Screws.
Right, thank you for that question, Alan. Is it Mr. Fenner?
Yeah, something you
Mr.
spoke
Fenner.
about earlier and touched on was about your thoughts of the other companies that come in and looked at Norton. What are your views, assuming that it doesn't involve too much bad language, for the people from Philip LaRue onwards?
I didn't catch all of that. I'm a bit Mutton Jeff, so...
So, what did you think of Norton from Philip LaRue onwards?
Oh, good question. Let me see on the list there. Philip LaRue, he was about 10th. And then some of them were colourful. I'm not going to be sued on that, am I? And Kenny Dreer was clearly very genuine. He was the man in America. We'll see a picture of his bike, the 961. But Norton, sort of like a magnet, it sometimes attracted the wrong sort of colourful people, didn't it, over the years? Something about, is it the curly scroll? Is it the racing history? Is it Norton? Is it the acoustic sound of Norton? I don't know. Over the years, it has attracted some interesting people, hasn't it? Like any good government civil servant, I'd rather not comment on individual cases, but as I said earlier in part one, I think we're in good, Norton, are in good hands with TVS. They seem, although something that worried me, one or two of us here were at their launch of the building at Solihull, magnificent building, is it 80, 90,000 square feet, with a 3-acre site next door, all boarded up, watch this Norton future, watch this space and so on. And an unusual launch of a building in that it was about mid-morning, and then after some speech making and some nibbles, it finished about 1 o'clock. And then we all went home. And there were 2 PR companies rounding people up and running it, and the Norton employees were badged up, and all ostensibly as keen as mustard. And I said to one of them, a young man who seemed to look good and looked intelligent, I said, well, you're enjoying Norton and so on? Yes, I've been here 6 months, da-da-da-da-da. I said, what do you think of John Blaw's achievements? And he said, John who? And this is a true story, and a little bit worried because history is important, and you've got to know what's going on. Similarly, some of us were involved with the launch of the BSA Gold Star at the National Motorcycle Museum. James Ewing did a lovely BSA through the ages display, and then later on that evening they lifted the drapes off 4 or 5 new Gold Stars, and that was a good bash. But in the lead up to it, one of the PR companies involved there had said, oh, there may be 1 or 2 people we've forgotten on the list to invite. Could you round some people up? And I was delighted to do that. A nice question. And I said, what about the Lampkin brothers? And again, he said, the who? So whilst we're not a very booky nation, and whilst we have fault, we don't, I sometimes feel us guys in the motorcycle don't look backwards. You must learn from history. Henry Ford was wrong when he said history is bunk. You've got to learn from history, and learn from the mistakes and from what went right before. Sorry about the lecture. That's the end of the lecture. What was the next question?
Well, the next question, we've not got there yet.
Oh.
Perhaps we'll ask one, Mike. Did you meet Bert Hopwood at all?
Yes, just once. At the time in 73, when we were, with government help, and that's in quotation marks, we were merging with BSA Triumph. In about July or August, Hugh Palin, my boss then at Andover, said, we ought to go and meet our potential new boss at Meriden, Bert Hopwood, because he was at Triumph and was higher up the scale at Triumph than Hugh Palin was at, and it seemed like a good move. So off we went to Meriden, who were on holiday and on strike at the same time, but that was part of the course with Triumph then. Anyway, we had a one-to-one meeting. We brown bagged with Bert Hopwood in his office and chatted generally. And he wasn't very keen on Paul or Bob Trick. He wasn't impressed with what we'd done with the Commando. And he had this very good idea of a module, you know, a 200 single, a 400 twin, and so on and so on. So there was a potential clash there. But I was obviously in awe of the bloke, as one would be, the first meeting and so on. And I did ask him about the relationship with the Rickman Matisse, because the most famous of all the Matisses at that time was a Triumph Matisse. It wasn't a matchless Matisse or any other sort of Matisse. Triumph were filling most 80% of the Matisse frames. And I asked him why he had never deliberately sold Triumph unit or pre-unit engines to the Rickmans. And he looked a bit surprised and said, those cowboys. And I thought that was a bit unkind. And I thought he was a bit unaware of their place in the market. About 2 years later, ironically, Bert Hopwood's American Triumph branch in America were buying 1,000 bikes a year from Rickman. So some cowboys, some stable.
Yes, Bert Hopwood, as all Norton Club members know, was the man who designed the Norton Dominator, which lasted for decades, and plenty of us in this room, I think, own Dominators. It's an all-time great machine.
Yeah, and what the cylinder head of the Norton, can you imagine, it went from 500cc to 828cc, and it still worked. I mean, he knew what he was doing. He did a good engine. He obviously did some lesser engines, but he was pretty good, wasn't he?
He was,
at what
yeah.
he did, yeah.
Yeah, it stood the test of time, hasn't it?
Yeah.
And still does. It's still a wonderful bike. So thanks for that question, Nick, Norton Owners Club member.
Don Rickman, looking at you,
There's Don and Eric Rickman, yeah.
and the registration number, which is actually 155E, was a Christmas present from his wife to Don. Great number, isn't it?
Right, it is, yeah. An earlier question mentioned the Coombe Norton. It's interesting that often you read that Barry Sheen never rode a four-stroke. Well, he did. He raced a Coombe Norton. It was perhaps only once or twice or thrice, but he raced a Coombe Norton. Peter Henshaw, that's the next question. And before Peter asks the question, I must tell you that Peter is working on a book that charts Mike's career. So good luck with that. It'll be book 81.
It'll be a good book.
Yeah. So your question, please, Peter.
Yeah, my question, Mike, is you mentioned that your first job at AGS was to sell a warehouse full of Stormers, and then you went on to Norton, and your first job there was to sell a warehouse full of Commandos. Why was there a warehouse full of Commandos when it had such good press and so on?
In a factory like Villiers, Wolverhampton, you make the same number of Commandos week in, week out. And you sell a lot more in April, May and June than what you do in November, December. And so at times we had a full warehouse and other times we had an empty warehouse, a tremendous up and down seasoning. But it's interesting, when John Player Norton did well, that definitely in May or June, 73, 74, definitely affected the sales, and if they did badly, that definitely affected sales. So that was quite apart from the seasonal factor. John Player results in the UK market made a difference of some 30 or 40 bikes a week, quite considerable back then. I don't know. Does it matter today if Honda win or lose a Grand Prix? Does it affect? Probably not.
Maybe in that market, the sports bike market, I think there's a following with superbikes. But generally, I don't think so.
I think if Ducati wins sales, I think it's the European manufacturer, Aprilia, 100%. Aprilia went racing with the V-twin in 1999-2000. Troy Corso won the Luna Seca World Superbike round on the Aprilia. The following month, every single RSV Aprilia in America found a new owner. They were cleaned out. Oh, this was in July. Oh, Telex, no, we didn't have Telex then. Email to the factory, please send more bikes. Sorry, the factory's closed. You must wait until September.
Right, thank you for that, Alan.
Can I just interrupt? An interesting picture there. In the flowery shirt, top centre, is Evel Knievel. And that was about 3 months before he died. That was at Delmar, an October reunion on the Delmar horse racing track, the stadium built by Bing Crosby and some friends in about 1943, and it's a mile racing track, horses and bikes. And annually they had the Delmar reunion. A lot of racers in the picture. Barry Briggs kneeling on the left, Dave Aldana on his right, Bruce Brown clapping his hands, Skip Van Leeuwen, great TT winner in the beige jacket, the yellowish jacket, then Jim Odom behind him, and so on. And not many people know that it was Evel Knievel's last ever jump. We got him a little bit tiddly. He was just a frail old man then, not the aggressive personality he'd been in his jumping days. And they got him a bit tiddly. Barry Briggs lay down on the ground and he jumped over him. And technically, I do believe I was there. I witnessed Evel Knievel's last jump. But on the Evel Knievel story, quite early on when I got to California, a call came in from Evel Knievel. This was in 1970, and Slarkey said, and I'd not heard of Evel Knievel. And he said, I want 2 bikes and spares and expenses. I'm Evel Knievel. I said, who? And we had a very strained conversation. And he was transferring then either from Triumph, they were letting him go, or American Eagle. He rode American Eagle, didn't he, for a while. And so he'd obviously come across Norton in the yellow pages and demanded a couple of free bikes and some spares. And I didn't know of him, and I didn't know anything or very much at all about motorcycle jumping, and would it sell bikes? I don't think it would. And so we couldn't get together. And wonderfully, before he put the phone down, or slammed the phone down, he said, "You'll never work in this town again." I've cherished that remark.
So, did Evel Knievel ever ride a Norton?
God help us, I hope not. I don't think so.
So he did. He had two M15 CSs that were supplied by Bob Blair's motorcycle shop in Glendale, and I've got a picture of him jumping a 65, 66 M15 CS.
Oh, really?
He rode M15 CS.
ZDS, Zundap Ducati Sachs, that was Bob Blair. He was the California distributor for Norton under Berliner. What Berliner did...
He never paid.
I can believe that. Berliner had 50 states, as previously stated, and what they did, they created about 13 or 14 millionaires. These were dealers, and they issued those dealers a territory of about 3 or 4 states each. And so Berliner supplied Nortons, Ducatis, Sachs, and Zundaps to these chosen 14 dealers, and then they sold them on to a sub-network. And all 14 became millionaires, and ZDS in California were one of them. It worked very well. Berliner were on quite a tight margin, but that was the way they got their volume. Very interesting.
On Berliner, I'll come to you in a second, thank you. On Berliner, Alan has just mentioned Ducati a minute ago. You were offered the V4 Apollo Ducatis, I believe.
Yes.
Please tell us about that, Mike.
Yeah. Well, I've been to a show at Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, where the Le Mans Guzzi was first seen. And I was due to end my 2-year stint in America. And with permission from the high-ups, they said, if you want to go and say formally goodbye to Berliner, go from Pennsylvania to New Jersey, and certainly do that. And while I was saying goodbye over a pleasant hour-long meeting with Berliners, they said, we've got a bike here, you might like it. You ride bikes. And it was the 4-cylinder Apollo. And they offered it me for commando retail plus crating. And that would have been $1,600 was the commando retail then, and $200 for the crate. And the classic market didn't start for another 5 or 6 years. And I really didn't know a lot about Italian history, but we all dropped clangers, and that would be one of my 100 clangers that I dropped in turning down the Apollo. It was ridden at Goodwood, wasn't it, by Ian Kerr, and what a wonderful bike the Apollo is. But it was for the Italian, they created it for the new American police to move Harley out of their monopoly. But there was no tyre capable of standing up to the power at the time. Was it a 425/18, Alan?
No, it was a 16-inch rear tyre,
Yeah.
and it was a Pirelli, and it threw treads at high speed on the autostrada, and had them twice, once to Franco Farnay and once to Fuzzi Di Brent, who were both race mechanics, and the second time it happened was big.
But I'm told it was the tyre problem. Was the one of the great what ifs.
Yeah, too powerful for the tyre technology. So how many were you offered? Can you remember how many bikes you got in stock?
How many Apollos were they offered?
Yeah.
Well, there was only one.
Was only the one?
Yeah, and that was what they...
Okay.
Yeah. And it would have been quite a large crate too. Quite a lot of wood, quite a lot of timber.
On numbers, how many commandos were built and what was your target for sales in the States?
Well, the target was sell every one we issue, but you know, sometimes there were shortages in production, and we didn't get the budgeted figure. Sometimes we got more than the budgeted figure because there had been cancellations elsewhere. But in round figures, about something between 45 and 50,000 commandos, 750 and 850 were made between 68, started in London, and 60 and 75 finished at Wolverhampton. And then after we went into administration, there was a lot of work in progress. And about 18 months after the final close of Villiers, we rehired a workforce and finished off another 1,500 commandos. So there were sort of fits and starts, but the total figure, I haven't got it exactly, but approximately 50,000, of which I think 40% would be 850s and 60% would be 750s, so round figures. And they were effectively, the first ones were at Woolwich, then we went to Andover Assembly, Wolverhampton production, then all production was in Wolverhampton, up to the 750, and that overlapped with the 850, and that was again a Wolverhampton job. And those Villiers people, there was an integrity about Villiers. They were very old-fashioned engine producers, but they became quite enthusiastic about Norton. And I do remember chasing them once for some Stormers, and they wouldn't release them until they were satisfied. And the bloke kept saying down the phone, "Must have it right, Mike, must have it right." That's not a bad black country accent, is it? And so that was their philosophy. They wouldn't cut corners, must have it right. And I feel they adapted well, Villiers adapted well to the Norton Commando. They were proud of their association with Norton.
Right, that's good to hear that. Now, next question, sir.
I wondered what you thought of the American cycle press, because in the early 70s, I regularly got a cycle over here, and I found it a much more comprehensive magazine in respect of road tests than most British.
Yes, the two giants in the motorcycle world, internationally, were Cycle and Cycle World, great rivals. Their car rivals were Car and Driver and Road and Track, you know, and those two publishing houses had aeroplane magazines, yachting magazines, gardening magazines, and so on. And these Cycle was the leader, and they were selling 450,000 every month. Cycle World was second, and they were selling about 350,000. As mentioned earlier, we took the first inside front cover on those mags. They were monthly. They had very long lead times because they were printed in Hong Kong. So if we were doing a road test for their April mag, we had to give them the bike in December, given their long lead times. But they were quality. And I mean, Cycle magazine, under the leadership of Cook Nielsen, actually installed their own dyno, and they had a workshop. That's how thorough they were. And Cook Nielsen was a great racer and sprinter in his own. He went 178 in a straight line at Bonneville one year on an unstreamlined bike, I believe. He was
on a Harley.
Yeah. Good bloke. And Jess Thomas was a member of the 200 Mile an Hour Club. And Cycle World had good people, including Jody Nicholas. So it was a very high standard. I don't think MCN or any of our monthlies here quite met that sort of opposite. Would you agree?
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. There were 7 or 8 other American magazines, lesser magazines. The number 3 being Cycle CBG, Cycle Bike Guide. And they got lesser and lesser, and Frank Melling wrote for the worst too, but don't quote me on that.
That's an interesting point about the American magazines. In the 70s, they were really good. You're absolutely right about that. Cook Nielsen won Daytona. Ducati?
Superbike Daytona.
Superbike Daytona, yeah.
Yeah.
Cook was a great rider. I was on a launch at BMW, and I think we were in Munich, and Cook was on the launch, and the Germans were amazed that he wore the edges of his shoes away. He was wearing ordinary shoes, and none of their riders had cranked the bikes over as far as Cook did. So he was a great editor, and I don't know if Peter would care to comment on American magazines and British magazines of the 70s. And did you read them?
We did, certainly.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, certainly I remember reading. I remember reading the Cycle and Cycle World. I mean, if only to see the Norton girls, really. You know, that was, we got some mugs here. We'll talk about those later. But no, I think the quality, you're absolutely right. And even now, it's interesting to see what's happening with magazines, particularly because, you know, we're getting more and more online magazines now. Can we do a quick straw poll? I mean, those in the room, do any of you read online magazines?
Oh, yes, but I have to.
Yeah, very few, very few. So we're a bit old school still, aren't we? Really? Okay.
Well, I think that's, sorry to interject, I think that demonstrates the split between the two. Almost all classic bike titles have remained in print, in hard copy, and part of the reason for that is that those of us who read them are older, and we finish looking at them, and then we do that, and we want to put them on a shelf and keep them.
Sure.
If you're looking for a modern title, it's often easier and quicker to get it online. They go to double expensive.
Shouldn't they be printed on parchment, no?
On the magazine front, we just heard that Trials of Motocross News is going out of print. Whether it goes online, we're not sure. But all the magazines in the UK have been affected by online services. So the sales are nowhere near as good as they used to be. MCN, for example, at one point had sales of 200,000. That was in the days when it was extremely popular. And some of the dealers, including Ken Haynes, 10 times ISDT gold medalist, would give his mechanics Wednesday afternoon to read MCN. He'd say, okay lads, you can down tools, and everyone read MCN to find out what the latest news was.
That's because
Now,
you were writing for it.
Sorry?
That's because you were writing for it.
Well, here's a little story about. At one point, a chap, I think he was just about to be committed to a lunatic asylum. He said, "Mike, what's your greatest achievement?" And I had to think on my feet, and I said, "I've read every single issue of MCN, true story, and survived." And I even had it sent out when I worked in America for 2 years. And I paid, from time to time, we've had free ones at work, but the last couple of 3 or 4, 5, 6, 7 years, I buy it. And I have seen, I haven't read it cover to cover, but I have seen every single issue of MCN and survived, and that's not a bad achievement.
Mike, 60 years in the industry, the year after next. Mike keeps abreast with all the news. His contact book must be one of the best in the world for international contacts as well as UK contacts. And as you know, I'm sure, Mike's heavily involved with the auction world and has been for the last 20 years, is it, Mike?
Well, it was said you would sell your grandmother, but but I can't get hold of her. Yeah, I went to beginning to help Sotheby's in '95, actually, and look what happened to them, you know.
Well, you're with Bonhams at the moment, aren't you? And you just had a stupendous sale.
Yes,
Stafford.
Yes, but Bonhams are lovely people. We've got lots of opposition, and that's good. Regional opposition, but Bonhams are national, and some super people work there, and we have some jolly good clients, and it's good fun. Every job is different, and 99% of the people you meet who are consigning a bike or bikes are wonderful people. You get the occasional tricky person, but very, very rare. And as I say, every job we do is different, and you learn the whole time. It's a good
Yes.
a good métier.
Yeah, £3.6 million turnover at the Stafford auction. Alan?
I've got a question that I think many of us in the room would really like to hear Mike's answer to this. Mike, what was Dennis Poor like? What's your view of him? What's your opinion of him as a person?
Well, it has quite a tricky public image because he Norton and Triumph failed on his watch. So he could be accused of being the barrier of the British motorcycling, but my God, he tried. To give you an idea of the soul that the man had, when his estate was being wound up, we found a Norton in a shed, a 1928 Norton, which he'd bought new from Alec Bennett as a young man. So his connection with Norton went back a long time. As you know, he was a very successful car racer, so he wasn't a bean counter main good. He was a good bloke, British Hill Climb champion 2 years running, and he drove actually in the first ever Grand Prix of Silverstone after the war. And you may remember Lord Curzon was the clerk of the course, and he stood up on an oil drum. This is the first British car Grand Prix after the war, 47 or 48, hissing with rain, I believe. Got on an oil drum. Great diversity of talent and machines, ERAs, Alfa Romeos, maybe one or two Ferraris and Maseratis and so on. Got on this oil drum and said, "Motor racing is dangerous, let's keep it that way." And of course that went home with the drivers, and they did take care. But anyway, back to Dennis Poor. He bought the Villiers, the Broke Villiers company and the Broke AMC company, and put the two together in about 65, and got a team of people led by Bob Trigg and Bernard Hooper to cook up the Commando, having rejected one or two other engines with the traditional Hopwood engine, and they put a bike together in about 14 or 15 weeks for the Earl's Court show, and they solved the vibration problem at the same time. And he was the driver behind that. And he was a big noise in the city of London, very respected and very straightforward. And he was the owner of Manganese Bronze, quite a successful. But he always kept the motorbike company separate from, he didn't want Manganese Bronze to guarantee the bikes in case it crashed, and that would bring down Manganese Bronze. So I think that displayed some integrity. Tremendous bloke to work for, but not a publicly popular figure. Quite approachable, but quite a shy man, but good fun to work for. And he would stay up all night to talk about, and often kept us up all night talking about Nortons. Would you believe it?
Well, interesting to learn that about Dennis Poor. I always thought he came out as a real bike enthusiast in pictures. He always looked really happy to be riding, riding the bikes. And he could see the potential with the Commando, because Commando saved Norton, didn't it? And
Yes.
Paul pushed all that through, didn't he? You could
Yes.
see what a good bike.
That's right. He was a wonderful negotiator, but there was a chance that one time we were going to merge, this was late 70s, get together with Yamaha. Yamaha, in my view, the most pragmatic of all the big four Japanese companies. And you will remember how the British car industry, Leyland, got on very well with Honda for a time, until BMW cleaved them apart. So it is possible to work with the Japanese, but us middle chaps, Norton, thought that RDP rather out-negotiated Yamaha when there was a chance of a merger. We could have done great things together. Their engineering and finance and our skills and name and reputation, it would have been a good cocktail, as was the Honda Leyland thing. And quite a lot of BSA Triumph Norton people had gone to Yamaha in drawing offices and on R&D and so on. So we were quite compatible with Yamaha, who, of course, were primarily headquartered for these sort of purposes in Amsterdam rather than in Hamamatsu. So that wasn't to be, and people at my level blamed Paul. He was too good a negotiator. I think he wanted to cut too hard a deal with the Japanese, who were delightful people, I have to say.
Yeah. Right, thank you, Mike. Do we have any more questions from the floor? Peter?
Yeah, so one more. A bit of a what-if question, Mike. You mentioned Dennis Poor and NVT. Do you think the two-factory scheme that he wanted to see go ahead, could that have succeeded if history had been different, if he managed to close Meriden?
I didn't hear all of that.
Was NVT viable? Would it have, if all things being equal, could it have succeeded, do you think, into the 80s and so on?
Well, we made a profit up until the time that we merged with BSA Triumph. Merge is a word combined with, linked with, taken over by, absorbed by, digested by. That was kind of forced on us by the Conservative government, who promised us about 30 million for tooling in the future. And then there was, remember Edward Heath, 3-day week, there was a change of government, and Wedgie Ben's lot reneged on that promise and instead put what money was available into the Meriden Co-op. And we spent far too much time and money and resources trying to resolve, initially, the Meriden Co-op pinched our factory. And although the pickets said, we love, eat, sleep, dream motorcycles, round the back were 300 brand new motorcycles left out in the open for 15 months, which they didn't love, dream, sleep about, because they belonged to us. I had to sell those 300 bikes, which had been left out in the open for 15 months with acid rain and so on. It was quite a difficult thing to sell. But you don't read about that in the Sunday Times or the Daily Mirror, do you? NVT, were we viable? Potentially were at certain times, and could have done it better. But when we were trading, when we were allowed to trade profitably, yes, we were viable. But it was a changing picture the whole time. Why don't you title our book "Never a Dull Moment"?
Just one question about talking about the mergers and that. We know the Cosworth-based Norton twin was supposed to follow on from the Commando. But was that really realistic?
Was the Cosworth
The challenge.
Oh, right. Cosworth challenge of viable proposition.
Dennis Moore knew Costin and Duckworth from his car racing days, and we were going to, if our merger with Triumph had been successful, we were going to do a Jaguar Daimler thing whereby 90% of the bikes would have been Triumph and 10% of the bikes would have been Norton. And one of the first engines available to us was the Cosworth as a parallel twin. You know, they used, I think, 33 hacksaw blades to cut a bit off the DFV engine. It's interesting, why didn't they cut it as a V-twin and not as a parallel twin? But that's a question for another day. It was a heavy engine. And we sent one in a box to CR Axtell, the famous Norton and Harley tuner in America, and it was about 85 horsepower out of the crate, whereas a Commando was about 55. So it was a lot more for a 750. And he said, gentlemen, that is a lazy engine, because it was heavy and balanced and so on. And there were only 25 of them, of which 3 or 4 went to Thruxton, to the John Player Norton, almost in sealed boxes. They weren't allowed to work on them at the track, and Cosworth didn't send anybody, so it wasn't easy. I had to sell the last 14 of them, and it took a year to sell them, and we got £10,000 for 14 engines, either complete or in bits, and a German bought them, but we never knew what happened to them. But I'm sorry to get off the point, but that was just one of the twin engines we were dealing with. Did we have another twin? If we did, I can't remember the next. The next twin would be the 961 generation, beyond my time. By then I was dealing with other things.
But there was nothing else to follow on from the Cosworth then?
Not in Dennis Paul's time.
I just wondered.
LaRue came in, what about, Paul died in 87, and LaRue came in about 84, 85?
That sounds about right, yeah.
By 1977, I was on Andover Norton, which was created to keep the spares thing. And clever buggers that we were, we thought, well, it'll last 3 or 4 years, you know. The average Commando owner will keep his bike 3 or 4 years. And it's still going now, twice the level it was when we started it, you know.
On this question of subsequent machinery, here's a picture of you with the Dreer Norton at Portland, Oregon, 2007. So what were you doing there, Mike? What was your involvement with Kenny?
We're trying to keep warm. It was October and it was snowing. That's the same picture on the screen. That's at Kenny Dreer's operation in Oregon. And he was one of the genuine people post Norton Villiers, and he was a development engineer, and he had a finance backer, and he was trying to get the Norton twin that he had bought from Shenston, their prototype or prototypes, trying to get them into production. And he asked me to, God knows how, because I'm not a test rider, but he said, come and have a go on this. At least you can give us your opinion on it. So I did 100 miles on it on black ice and in the snow, and it handled beautifully, but it was very rough and nowhere near production ready. And my description of it always is it was like a street legal production racer, but not ready for release to Joe Public. Right. And he got the styling right. I think he styled that more than they did at Shenston, didn't he? That might be an O'Field styling, I don't know, but it looked the part, but it was rough, especially on black ice. I've got a couple of lantern slides of my own, and it makes my mileage here deductible if I show them to you. Now, and neither of these posters leak oil, you'll notice. I found that in a skip in in my early days at Andover. They were clearing out Plumstead, the old works at Plumstead, and this poster was scrumpled up in a skip. It had come down from London, and I couldn't resist sorting it out and putting it on. Isn't it wonderful? Jeff Duke, you're all over 16. You all remember Jeff Duke. He was hired by Norton, you know, as a scrambles tester. And he was no mean rider on trials either, and he won the victory trial. Now, that was run by the Birmingham Club. Well, with so many factories in Birmingham and Coventry, you can imagine what a derby it was winning the victory trial, and all credit to Norton and Jeff Duke, so I'm very proud of that. And Jeff did sign it once at Bewley when he came as our guest. And there's only one of these in the world, I think, because we printed 100 of them, This was in America. Whoever advertises fourth place, for God's sake. At Daytona, in the early days of, I think it was the first outing in America on the John Player Norton, the Cornish crockery one, Phil Reed and Peter Williams were riding them, and the opposition came from two-stroke Yamahas, the water-cooled Yamaha 350, which was about 10 miles an hour quicker than our Normans. But while they were filling up with fuel, Phil Reed was in the lead momentarily. Peter Williams had already retired with, quotation marks, ignition trouble. But Phil Reed was capable of nursing along and actually finished fourth. And it was the first result we'd had at Daytona since the Manx won there years ago and were promptly banned, you know, by the land of the free Americans. And just quirkily, we cooked up that ad. Now we did 100 and they went out to dealers, but I would probably bet this is the only one in the world, so, and it doesn't really go on. Okay, end of broadcast.
Right. Well, we're coming towards the end of the talk, but we must ask Mike about seeing the Manx Norton with Jeff Duke being raced at Blandford Camp, 1950. It's either 50 or 51, was it, Mike?
Oh yes, Whitson. When I got to 12, I was incarcerated at a boarding school in Dorset, Blandford. And when you got to 12, you were allowed out on the roads on your bicycle. And Whitson was a free day in Exeat. So I thought, I'm going to go up to Blandford Camp. And I'd been given £1 for the term, pocket money, and I still had 5 bob. So I got 5 bob from the bursar and set off, with permission, and I don't know whether I packed lunch or not, for Blandford Camp, about 3 or 4 miles away, where they were having an international road race. And got to Blandford, and I bought a bun and a Tizer, or would it be a Corona? And so that I then had 3 and 6. Cycled up the hill to Blandford, and went to get in, and it was 5 bob, and I only had 3 and 6. Now, the Bramble Hill Club, luckily, used a lot of the Southampton Club marshals on the day to marshal the track and everything. And luckily, some of the Southampton people were on the gate, and they said, "Oh, you're John Jackson's brother. You were at the trial in the winter. Oh, do you want to get in?" And I got in for nothing, complete with my 3 and 6. And I was by now, as I said earlier, very keen on Norton, and I somehow managed to cross the track and get into the pits. And there was a huge crowd around Norton because, and they didn't tell me about it, they were showing off their first 3 feather beds. And I didn't know they were feather beds, I just noticed that from the garden gate, the tanks were different, and the rear suspensions and so on, but the main difference visually between a featherbed and a garden gate was the fuel tank. And I even got Jeff Duke's autograph on the day, long lost, and that was the first day ever, first appearance, Lockett, Brett and Duke at Blandford Camp, 2 or 3 years before it was banned. Eventually when a Cooper racing car ended up on the roof of the guardhouse, questions were asked in Parliament, and Blandford was banned, but it was a great place, and I have a very happy memory of being there on that famous day.
And the Manx Norton is possibly the best known single racing bike the world has ever known. Now, I don't know where the time's gone. We've got several other topics for Mike, but we have to finish roughly on time. So I'd like to thank you all very much for your attendance. Thank the Norton Club for what a wonderful presentation you've given us. Thanks to Andy Curzon and Mark for the bikes. I'd like to say that the word legend often is overused, but in Mike's case, is more than justified. He comes up to 60 years in the industry, 70 years as a competitor. He estimates he rode in 1,000 competition events, trials, motocross, desert. He became a magazine columnist, Bike Magazine. He was Hat Spoons while he was working in America. Obviously, as we've learned, he played a key role in the Norton world and is still involved in the motorcycle scene and loves Norton, currently still president of the club. He helped set up Andover Norton, later owning it. He was co-owner of BSA when it became BSA Regal. He was co-MZ importer. There's no end to the list of things Mike's been involved in. Organised the Louis Vuitton concours, organised gatherings for the motocross fraternity, talks at Bewley, lead consultant in the auction world. Best of all, Mike's got a great sense of humour, as well as his wonderful fund of stories. He's got this wonderful dry sense of humour that makes him a pleasure to be with any time, day or night. Mostly at night, because he doesn't get up till about midday. So, Mike, may your legend continue for many years to come. We look forward to the book on you, and we thank you very much for these precious 2 hours with you.
Could I just interrupt, Ray? First of all, I've wanted to interrogate you for many years, and this has given me the opportunity. But this little story, true story, will bring it all in proportion. At the time that we were liquidating the company, we had to sell some hundreds, almost some thousands of commandos. We had to sell them off cheap to get the money in before the administrator took over. We knew we were going broke. And over about a 5 or 6 week period, we did some amazing deals with Belt Potovan in Belgium and with Elite Motors and various people. And I was persuading these people to buy Commandos and Tridents in crates as an investment, and some of them did. And one would I'd take the check in, because it was checks and post in those days. One would take the checks into the accounts department. You know, I insisted that we, the sales department, opened the post every day rather than the bean counters. And they were always very grateful. And they said, oh, this will keep us going a bit longer. And on the final day, I think it was a payment for about 40 bikes. We'd pulled off a sales deal, cut into the margin a bit, but we had got the money, got the cash, and took it into the head bean counter and gave them the check. And the following day, I said, well, how long, that check, and all the other checks, how long will yesterday's check keep us, how much extra longer will that keep us going? And he said, about 20 minutes. The story of my life. That's it.
Right, thank you, Mike. Now, before we ask for a round of applause, Peter is going to make a presentation to Mike in honour of his services to...
Oh, Paul's going to do it, right?
Well, I'm not going to do it. All right, so just a couple of thank yous. First of all, for attending earlier and coming back. Hope you've all enjoyed it. I'd like to thank my colleagues in the Norton Owners Club that have helped me today, providing the bikes. We've had merchandise and spares in the main hall, and all of our posters and putting out the chairs and all that stuff, all the little details. So thank you all for helping me in that. I don't know about you, but I could tell from what Brian was saying how much prep he put into this, and controlling Mike and helping with the whole talk. So first thank you is to Brian. Right, thank you. And we've recently had some Norton Owners Clubs mugs commissioned by Andy, our merchandising officer, and we've got a selection of them for Mike, and Peter's going to present them. They're all in the box, but here's a couple of ones we made earlier.
I think we'll send those to Mike.
Yeah.
I think so basically, they've got Norton Owners Club on the front, and they've got the Commando girls on the back. So.
I think you can buy them in the hall off Andy a bit later on if you want to buy one for cheap.
So we'd like to thank you, Mike, for coming along today and doing all this thing. This is we're going to give you a list of every single Norton girl on a mug, for your kitchen, all right?
One born every minute.
But I think we'll send them to you, rather than expect you to carry them.
No.
No, you can carry them if you
Your cup flowed over.
Well, thank you very much.
All right, that's a wrap. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much.